You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you a little bit about our current sponsors, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. As you well know, if you've been following This is Oklahoma, they've been a huge part of this podcast. So this podcast is presented by the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, telling an Oklahoma story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at oklahomahof. Also, for the podcast, a new sponsor this year that's just come on board and super excited to announce RCB Bank. Since 1936, RCB Bank has offered progressive products and a friendly service. Come in today to find out more about their loan promotion on new, used, refinanced cars, boats, campers, and ATVs. Visit RCB Bank to learn more. RCB Bank, that's my bank. With approved credit, restrictions apply. Now, let's get into today's episode.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode up in Stillwater today. We are in cowboy country at the home of KICKER Audio with the main man, I guess the man in charge, Mr. Steve Irby. Steve, thanks for inviting me up here. Thanks for having me on the. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Super excited to dive into the story. Of such a global brand. I mean, and to be home in Stillwater, I'm sure is an important thing to you. But I guess for people who probably don't know what KICKER is, I mean, how would you tell them what KICKER is?
Well, KICKER these days is a little bit different than when we first started, but the name KICKER has to do with car audio. Mm-hmm. And so our primary business is car audio these days. And we do speakers, amplifiers, but we also do marine audio. We do audio for motorcycles, for UTVs, side-by-sides. Mm. We do some home audio, a little bit of portable home audio. Yeah. And so we've diversified, but still car audio is the biggest part of the business. Yeah. So today.
Today, right. Yeah. So obviously the home in Stillwater, being up here, born and raised in this part of town, this part of the country as well? I was born and raised in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Yeah. So this is home for me. Okay. And so grew up here, school here, and then so OSU was in the blood then, obviously. Well,
not exactly. I actually went to Phillips University in Enid, which is about 60 miles away. Was a smaller private school, and had a great experience there. And I came back to OSU for graduate school. Okay. And almost finished.
So the KICKER story then, was it something that kind of you just tinkered with and had a business, or just had I wanted to upgrade your speakers in your car growing up? Or how do you get to starting it?
Well, it really started. As you can see in my office, which you can't see on the video here, but I've got some Beatles posters on the walls. Yeah. And that was a big influence on my life back when I was in high school. In 1964, the Beatles came and toured the U.S. Mm-hmm. And so we all wanted to start garage bands. I mean, we really wanted to start a garage band and wanted to be, famous rock and roll players. So that was really how I got into building speakers, is that I played in a band. We started the band, and the organ that I had that I was playing was just a little home organ, and it was not loud enough. The drummer played too loud, and so I couldn't hear myself. And I remember I went to my dad and said, I can't hear myself. I need a speaker. I need an amplifier. Okay. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, it's a Fender Bandmaster. I'd been to the music store. I'd scoped it out, and I knew what I wanted. And he said, well, how much is it? And I said, it's $300. I guess I was asking, probably, in a way. Yeah. And he was reading the evening paper and sitting in the chair, and I remember the paper just kind of dropped in his lap, and he looked at me and said, $300? And I'm going, yeah. And he goes, well, he didn't say no, fortunately, but he said, what is it? And I said, well, it's two 12-inch speakers in a speaker box with an amplifier on top. And he asked if that was something that we could build. And I said, well, I don't know. Maybe we could build the speakers. I'm not sure. But we grew up in a family that my dad was an architect, but he taught construction technology at OSU. And so he was into building things. We built everything from the house we lived in to camping trailers, go-karts, motorbikes. If we wanted something, basically, we built it.
Yeah.
And so that was how that worked. And so we built a speaker and borrowed the woofer from the drummer's dad. He was going to put it in his stereo, but I think I got my hands on it first, and it was a big 15-inch Altec Lansing speaker. And so my dad and I got plans, and we built a speaker box for that. And so I think that was originally where the kind of the passion for sound and building speakers started, was way back in 1965.
Yeah.
In high school.
Wow. So you played organ and then piano as well, I guess.
And piano,
keyboard,
right.
Yeah.
And I used that speaker and then played in bands through high school and college and after. Mm-hmm. And so started building speakers as a hobby for the band primarily. And so that was PA speakers, guitar speakers, bass guitar speakers, monitor speakers,
right.
Anything that was, I loved it. But it was a hobby, and I didn't ever think it would be a business. So I stayed in school.
Yeah. So what got you into music then growing up at a young age?
Well, I started taking piano lessons in second grade. My mom was a musician and played piano and organ. And so she encouraged me to start taking piano lessons, which I did for probably about 9 years. I didn't like practicing, but she, I say, forced me to practice, sort of. But when I got into seventh grade, she said, well, if you want to quit now, you can. I think by then she knew that I kind of liked it.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, maybe I'll try it a little longer. And then when the idea for a band came up, they said, well, Irby, you play the keyboards, right? And I go, well, I take piano lessons. I don't know how to play rock and roll, but none of us did.
Yeah.
So we kind of figured that out from listening to records. But yeah, I liked music, and but mostly, taking piano lessons, you're playing classical and things like that. So I had to start all over, and learn how to play chords and rock and roll, and mainly we just would sit around, listen to records, and try to figure out the chords, and kind of started from scratch. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like, just to go back to those times, being a garage and just hanging out and with your mates, and not much care in the world apart from the music.
No,
right?
it was pretty exciting times, and the music scene was really happening. Mm-hmm. It was just starting to happen in the mid '60s, and then of course you got into sort of more of the hippie movement, and then real rock and roll and stuff in the later '60s and early '70s. But that was the period that I got started in, and so music was really evolving fast, and we were right in the middle of it, and it was a lot of fun. But that was, I think, where the real passion developed for not only just music, but for the audio equipment that we used as well.
Were you guys kind of, I guess, a little different, trying, listening to the Beatles, really kind of enjoying that movement? What was country music like at that time? Were you guys different because you liked the Beatles over the country music scene?
Yes. Back then, as far as our group was concerned, country music was not cool.
Yeah.
We were rock and rollers, and country was kind of just sort of cowboy stuff, that was not, we were city guys, I guess you'd say. I don't know. There was more, that sort of flipped over totally in the concept, I think, nowadays. But back then, it was music you might play if you lived on a farm or rode a horse, or, it was a little more twangy and earthy, and we liked rock and roll.
You like banging chords and that,
Yes. But that said, we started playing some country music, and we did a few songs to appease people, and then, Yeah, we kind of liked it, but we never became a country band. But we would throw in a few things here and there. And then later in high school, towards the end of high school, we got a new guitar player that had more of a country background. And so we had more of that influence. And then we did the 50s music. And he went through phases. Elvis phase, we played a lot of Elvis stuff. Bob Dylan phase, we played a lot of Bob Dylan stuff. We did Hank Williams. We did some country stuff, and we ended up being fairly eclectic, I think, over time.
Yeah, just a love for performing and hanging out. Yeah,
liked it all, but still, rock and roll was the main thing.
Yeah. So back, I guess, to that point where Dad says, "Hey, we can build this. Let's make it," and then you start tinkering and building other speakers for friends in the band, and I'm sure other friends as well.
Yeah.
You're just kind of figuring it out, thinking, "Hang on, this can be done."
Yeah.
You do your master. I guess you go off to school in Enid and still doing the tinkering and still making speakers and stuff.
I was, but not thinking about it as a business.
Okay.
And I was in sociology, and of course we were sort of hippie wannabes, I guess, back in the day. And the Vietnam draft was happening. I had a low number. Fortunately, I didn't have to go, but we were part of that kind of counterculture, I think, that said, we can do better than this. We can make the world a better place. Mm-hmm. And that was generally why I went into sociology, thinking, through science, we can solve some of these societal problems and these wars and things like that guys are going off and dying in Vietnam, and we don't really understand why. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of my theoretical educational side, that I'm going to do this in school. But when I got towards the end of grad school, I realized, but this is not really what I want to do. Sort of an awakening, scary awakening. And that's when I dropped out of grad school.
So you would pursuing a master's in sociology as well then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when you dropped out, how's that conversation with family? What does mom and dad think at that point?
Well, obviously, my dad was taught at the university for 30 years.
Yeah. And
I was always taught, these days, and I mean, talking about these days, that was in the 50s and 60s. My parents said, you need more than a bachelor's degree. Yeah. You need a master's degree. And so that was fairly important, but it went okay, actually. I mean, I think my parents understood that I had to find myself. You can only do what other people think you should do for so long, and then you've got to make some decisions. And I reached that point towards the end of my master's degree that I was facing life, and I'm sort of playing this game that this is interesting and I think it's good, but it's not what I want to do the rest of my life.
Right.
So I think that was my, so to speak, come to Jesus moment, and which actually happened, not exactly like that, but I went to the head of the department. I said, I'm dropping out, and I think the answers are in religion, not in science. And I didn't really know what I was saying, but I was on this plane that was like, this is not happening. All they've got here is theories, and I want to get down to the rock bottom of what everything's about. And when I start questioning theories and asking why too many times, people were getting upset with me. And I was going, this is, I think this is a great discipline, but I'm needing something more for my life. This is not maybe about that. Uh-huh. And so he said, well, there's a guy from our church I'd like you to talk to. And I said, well, why not? I mean, I had hair about halfway down my back, but I was seriously looking for truth. I was looking for answers, and I was tired of playing games that I'd been doing all these years and just doing the things you're supposed to do. And so this guy, I did meet with him, and he says, well, you need to accept Jesus as your personal Savior, and right off the bat. And nobody ever said that to me. And I just go, well, he was in the Bible, right? And he goes, yeah. And I was like, okay, but I can't accept anybody. I'm not going to let people in my house I don't even know them. I said, well, you need to get a Bible and read it and find out. And I said, okay, I'll do it. I mean, at that point, I was like, I'm ready. Show me the truth and where my life is going and what to do, because I don't want to play any more games. I'm done. And so that was kind of the start of my spiritual journey. But also during that time, I found another book in the library, which was Loudspeakers and Enclosures, and it was and I've got that. I'll show you the book.
Yeah.
So this was fairly heavily used.
Yeah.
And
that's brilliant.
That was So I decided, I want to look into this, and I got a construction job. I was just building metal buildings, and I started reading that book, and I was reading the Bible. I was reading both like every day, and I had this idea, because really, kind of my prayer was not exactly to find God. It was not quite that spiritual. It was like, I need to find me a job. Like, what am I going to do with my life? And in reading this book, it was written so well and explained things so well about speakers, a lot of things I'd wanted to know. And I went to my roommate, who was also a grad school dropout, and he was surveying land. He was surveying out in the wilds of Arkansas and off and on. But I said, I think I want to start a speaker company. You want to go in with me? And he said, yeah, why not? So that was the business plan.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I had $12,000 that I'd inherited from both of my grandparents, and had been sitting there for quite some time. And my parents wouldn't let me spend it on a car or musical equipment and stuff. And, thinking, no, that's not what that's for. And so I remember thinking, I think this would be a good thing to do. And I talked to my dad, and he said, yeah, I think it's a good idea. And so I bought some saws and woodworking tools and different things, and we set up in our garage, and we got some plans from Alltech Lansing, which had plans for a big PA speaker that a lot of guys used in bands. Mm-hmm. And we built the speaker enclosure just according to their plans, and would sell them to bands.
Yeah.
And that's how we got started, and mostly just sold them to our friends.
Yeah.
And so that was the start of, and it was Stillwater Designs is the name we came up with, just being in Stillwater, and also figuring if the speaker thing doesn't work out, the name's kind of flexible.
Right, very flexible, yeah.
So, but that was about 6 months. We were in the garage, and then I got married. We kicked Keith out, my roommate. My wife did. Then she kicked both of us out of the garage because it was full of sawdust was permeating the house. It was everywhere.
Yeah.
And so we rented a little house on South Main Street, and then felt like we were really in business. But that was 1973.
Yeah.
And but that's why I say we haven't always been KICKER.
Gotcha.
I was building PA systems. My vision was, okay, I've got it. I think, God gave me this plan. I mean, not a plan, but direction. Mm-hmm. And I was like going for it, 100%. And I'm going to build big rock and roll PA systems. And that's what we worked on really for about 7 years.
Yeah. How old were you when you started?
I was 24.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, people listening, the people starting businesses, and it's never, some people are like, they're 16, they're 17, they're 18, like, I want to start a business. Well,
yeah,
you still got life experience ahead of you, right? You don't have to rush into it. And you guys went through, so many avenues. You could have gone so many different ways.
Yeah.
And finally came to, to thinking, hang on, I'm going to build PA systems.
So did you go to a lot of rock concerts at that time? What was kind of like in mid 70s? What was, I guess, the band that you thought, oh man, if we can make a PA system for them, like that is the North Star, that's the goal?
Well, probably just about any of them. Yeah, we didn't go, I would say, to a lot of concerts. Basically, our band was playing a lot, So most of the time we were playing.
Yeah.
But I, did go to concerts and I remember we went to a Grateful Dead concert and just different ones. My favorite group was always the Beatles, and I never saw them perform. And now in latter years, I saw McCartney perform.
Yeah.
And that was a real treat for me. And we got some really good tickets and went and saw him perform. And just an interesting little story was that Paul McCartney taught me how to play bass, but he doesn't know it. And so when we were playing in the band, I was playing keyboards, and then I had electric piano. And our bass player moved, and so we had no bass player. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that they made little keyboard basses that were, the Fender company made them, and it was small enough I could set it on top of my electric piano. Yeah. And so I bought one, and I built the bass amp, the speakers and amplifier, bought the amp, and played keyboard bass. Yeah. But I didn't know how to play bass. I'd never played bass. And so I listened to Beatles records, and I listened to Paul McCartney play bass. Mm-hmm. And just, up there, head by the speaker, just listening. And so that's how I learned to play bass.
Gotcha.
And so, anyway, I never have had a chance to tell him that he was a good teacher. Yeah.
Do you have any of his memorabilia or any of his guitars or anything like that?
No, I've got this shirt that was given to me that was signed by Paul McCartney.
Yeah. But haven't gone down the rabbit hole of buying any of his guitars yet?
No. I'm not really into that kind of stuff. But I just like the music, and I thought they made really good music as a band. Yeah. And he was my favorite one out of the band.
Did you hear the story? I think I recently did a podcast with a guy from Tulsa called Greg Renoff, who wrote a book about Van Halen called Van Halen Rising.
Yeah.
He wrote a book, and it's basically about Van Halen backyard cover band before they made it. So the book's fantastic.
Yeah.
Audiobook's great too. And he was telling the story because obviously Eddie was known for building his amps and stuff like that. And I thought that was really fascinating that he did that kind of stuff and changed the fuses and made them louder. And because he wanted to be, everyone was trying, why is he so loud? And he kind of wouldn't tell anybody, that he had done his thing. But that was a really fun interview that I did with Greg, and a great book too. He lives in Tulsa, that Greg does. He's a historian and rock and roll lover.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Eddie Van Halen, is and the guy that I was telling you about that started playing guitar with us in high school, his name was Steve Ripley. And so we were all a little bit into, more than a little bit, we were into the equipment side of it as well.
Yeah.
Which I was deeply into it. And Steve got into building guitars. And first off, he would just modify his guitars, and he made a Fender, I think it was a Telecaster, but he refinished it with a Paisley finish, back in the day, which was kind of cool, we thought. And he would do all this stuff with guitars, and then he got into doing work on them. And later, after that band broke up, he moved to California and got a job working for Leon Russell. I'm not sure if you're familiar with who he is, but a Tulsa musician that.
The museum is going to be coming back.
Yes,
right?
the OK Pop Museum, and then he had a studio called the Church Studio, and back in Tulsa later. Mm-hmm. But he was in L.A. as a studio musician, and then had his own career, and later toured with Elton John, and they were good friends. But Steve worked for him in the studio, and but he was making guitars, and he invented a guitar that had an amplifier for each string. So the pickup on the guitar was not just one single one that picked up all strings equally, but it had a separate output for each string.
Yeah.
And so you had 6 amps across the stage. So you go, and the sound goes
lights it
across
up,
the stage. Well, so he built this for Eddie Van Halen.
Okay.
And so that guitar just sold for $50,000.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it's got the stripes on it, and so. And then we did a little bit of promotion with him too. We built a pickup truck with a kicker system in it that had the stripes on it.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty familiar with him and
that's
that.
Really cool.
But my friend Steve Ripley that played, he was into building guitars, and that was interesting. He's unfortunately has passed now, but we played together for about 8 years, and a lot of good memories there.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
So
and then he had a group too, the Tractors, that had a million-selling album, and so he went on and lived out his life basically in the music industry, and I went towards the equipment side.
You went the equipment side.
Yeah.
That's interesting to have you both like in the same kind of group hanging out, and then to see you both be super successful going that way.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. So obviously it's Stillwater Designs. You're building systems.
Yeah.
You go from the garage to a new house, and then I guess you go to a new facility, and just business slowly starts to grow.
Yeah. But we were in the little house on South Main Street. It was just an old, kind of a junk house. We kind of remodeled the outside and basically wood shop in the back. Front 2 rooms were just a little tiny showroom.
Yeah.
And but we built all of our speakers there, and did that for about 7 years. And actually, after 3 years, I'd lost all my money. My partner, my roommate, wanted out as a partner, but he continued on as an employee, and for another 5 years. Then he went back to school, got an accounting degree, and had a successful accounting firm and had a career doing that. And he did all of our accounting and stuff.
Okay.
But so we're still really good friends. But the first 7 years, basically after 7 years, I was making enough money just to support my family. My wife had been teaching school, kind of lived off her salary, so she was the one that made this happen.
Yeah.
And but in 1980, several different things happened. My daughter was born. My wife stopped working. I was making enough money to support the family. And a buddy of mine that had been an OSU student, and I used to build speakers for him, he was kind of an experimenter too, and so he'd have the idea and then I'd build it for him. And he had started a music store in Canton, Oklahoma, and he called me up and said, these guys are working in the oil field, they're driving pickup trucks, they've got a lot of money, and they want some bass and some good sound in a pickup truck. And they were just single cab trucks in those days, pretty much not extended, and so there wasn't any place to put a subwoofer except there's a little space behind the seat.
Yeah.
And so he sent me the dimensions of the space behind the seat in a single cab pickup truck, and I designed a speaker that fit there, but it was also a subwoofer plus full range.
Okay.
The sound came out from behind the back seat as well.
Yeah.
The bass went right through the seat.
Yeah.
And so so I built it for him, kind of like we'd been doing, sent it over there to him. He goes, cool. Calls him back a few days later and says, well, these guys love this speaker. We're going to need a lot more. And he says, you know what they call it? And I go, no, what? He said, they call it the ass kicker. Because it kicks your butt right through the seat.
Yeah.
And he was right, and I'm going, really? Okay. And so I started we built as many as we could, just my partner and I. And eventually I just said, to me it was a sideline because I had this other vision of building big rock and roll systems. And I said, why don't you just build these? You can have the design. I mean, it's just, it was kind of easy for me to design.
Yeah.
And you can just do it. And he goes, no, I don't want to set up a wood shop. I don't want to do this. I want you to keep building them. Why don't you try to sell them to some other music stores? And his idea was that I would get interested and build more so he could buy them.
Yeah.
because I sold them to him for $125. He sold them to the customer for $250, and he was just selling them
so
like
happy.
that.
Yeah.
He was just making money like that.
Yeah.
And so I was playing in a band, and the bass player in our band wanted to start a wood shop, and I said, why don't you, he was going to build picture frames, and I said, well, why don't you build these boxes for me, and we'll gear up production.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was 1980. We had a product, turned out that nobody had, and it sounded like much better than anything in car audio at that time. I mean, and literally it kicked you right through the seat. I mean, it was designed like a PA system, like I'd been doing, except in a small cab. And it was like, wow, pretty amazing. So that was really how KICKER got started, and we eventually dropped the ass part. This one with a kicker, and later trademarked the name KICKER.
Okay.
And so that was kind of the beginning of the car audio, and that eventually really overtook the other side of the business.
Got you. So that takes off. At that time, I'm sure you're telling your wife, you're like, hey, I think we've got something here.
Yeah.
Like this is starting to, because up until those 7 years, were you just doing like local stuff and regional stuff, I guess, and like the stores? Because obviously there's no online sales at that point, right? It's just like, you're probably driving out and saying, hey, would you try?
We sent out letters, to music stores. Yeah.
Yeah. So and I mean, another lesson people listening to, like things just don't happen overnight. You've been in business for 7 years.
Yeah.
Thankfully your wife's working, you're making ends meet, and it's. I think a lot of people today are. They want it to happen now, don't they? They want to have thousands of sales now and stuff like that. So it's a great lesson for people listening that it takes time, right? And it's you earn that longevity as well. So things are kicking off. Your bandmate is making stuff to help with production. When then do you go to, I guess, hiring more employees to have that to scale, right? Because at the point you probably got sales coming in, you're backed up, and like, what's the next phase?
Well, it turns out that we were at the beginning of a really huge boom in car audio, and for a couple of different reasons. But one was because up until then, they had only invented an amplifier for car audio. The maximum you could get out of a 12-volt system was 18 watts, which is not a whole lot. And but then a company called it was not Mobile Audio, it was Audio Mobile, invented an amplifier that had a switching power supply, which kind of stepped up what you could get out of a 12-volt system, somewhat unlimited.
Yeah.
Okay, so the amplifiers started getting bigger, and then with systems like we had, bigger speaker systems, you could get this amazing sound in the car. And the technology, even CD players hadn't been invented yet. In 83, 84, they came along. So this was all just happening. We were in on the ground floor, and you're right, it began to grow so fast that we had to begin to hire more people, mostly part-time college students at first.
Yeah.
And just growing the business. And then my buddy that was building the cabinets, he had to hire more people. And so it was a crazy time. And through the 80s, I went back later and looked, and our sales, we averaged 70% growth a year for 10 years in a row during the 80s. And that was the average.
Yeah.
And so some years, I mean, we grew 100 or 200%. Of course, when you're small, that's not a lot.
Right. But
over the period of 10
huge.
years, it still averaged 70%.
Yeah.
So by the end of the 80s, and we had a lot more products than just that one. I thought it would only just be that one, but immediately there were requests for, well, can you do this, and this? So by the end of the 80s, we were distributed in all 50 states. We were selling into Canada and Mexico too in 10 years. And we started an international department in 1990 and hired a director for that. And so, but it was a crazy, really crazy 10 years. And every year we didn't just forecast if it'd be up or down. It was a matter of how much up.
Right. Just riding the wave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I learned a lot. But frankly, the first 7 years in business, I kind of say that's where I earned my doctorate degree.
Yeah.
Because all I did was study about speakers and experiment, because I had a lot of time to do it and not much sales.
Yeah.
And so I learned a lot about speakers. And I also learned how to run a company from square one to square 5 or 6, and then it went on to square 100 or whatever. So that time was a learning time and was very necessary for what was going to happen from the 80s on.
Yeah.
To hold it together, because it was a wild,
It was on a rocket
wild
ship.
ride. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was. But and I'm not saying we held it together great, but we did make it.
Right, we're
we
still here today, right? Yeah,
we survived.
Yeah, that's.
So-
I bet. I mean, there's got to be so many kind of like wild and great, ups and down moments of that growth, right? Because it's so rapid.
Yeah, it was very very interesting, and people would say, you don't know anything when you start in business, which is why you don't want to make a whole lot of money real quick, because you don't know how to handle it. You just don't know anything. You don't know what you don't know. And as we were starting to grow in the 80s, it was growing so fast, and people would say, this is going to level off sometime and plateau. And I'm thinking, nah,
Like I'm going to the moon.
They were right.
Yeah.
I didn't know, so you're just kind of going with it
Right.
as best you can. And, but you learn as you go, that's kind of, experience is a great teacher.
Yeah.
Make a lot of mistakes, but keep going.
Yeah. I mean, the value is in the mistake, right? And learning from it.
Yeah. And if you don't, well, you suffer for it, you suffer either way.
Yeah.
But if you learn for it, that's how you become more wise and stable, and because you've been through stuff and you got your feet under you a little bit better.
I guess every year you probably had a moment that you said to your wife, you're like, we've made it. And then next year was topped and topped for 10 years in a row.
I didn't think that much about it. I just thought we just need to keep up. And I was always up for, it was exciting. It was fun. And the interesting thing was I never got in the business to try to kind of make it or to make money.
Mm-hmm.
I got in that business because I knew I had to find a direction in life that was right for me and that I would enjoy doing, because I wasn't successful or happy doing other stuff. And so I was just like, I found something I can really get into, and where it goes, I have no idea. I don't really care, because I'm doing what I like to do.
Right.
And so that was certainly icing on the cake. But I never, my only goal was just always improve, but I never had a goal like, I'm going to get here and then I've arrived.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to sell out, or, then I started hearing from students and started working with students about your exit strategy, and I go, exit? What do you mean?
What else am I going to do for the rest of my life?
There's nothing, I don't have anything else to,
Yeah.
Sometimes you'd think about, when mainly financial difficulties, you think, I'm just going to get out of this at this point in time, and but then it would kind of come back to me like, okay, so what are you going to do? Don't know. How'd you get into this? Well, I felt like the Lord directed me into this through a lot of circumstances, and it was right for me, and I was like, this is it. And so, you're going to just quit? Well, no.
Yeah.
So what do? Well, you just keep going.
Keep evolving, new products.
So, but there's a lot of tendencies, especially with financial difficulties, to think about getting out and cashing out or whatever. But then the question was always, what are you going to do? And the bigger question was usually, okay, you can quit now, but you don't know what's around the next corner. And I'd have to go, yeah, you're right. I'm kind of curious. I'd like to know how it's going to end up.
Yeah.
And if you quit, you'll never find out what it could have been. So I think, in a certain way, I felt like maybe somehow the Lord kind of challenged me on that, just internally, like, if you quit, you'll never. And I had quit things earlier in life, and I hated the feeling. And I thought, I don't like that feeling. I don't want to do that. And so Yeah, and I'd like to know what it could turn out to be, and I'm still finding out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the exciting part of it.
This podcast is presented by the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, telling Oklahoma story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at oklahomahof. Also, huge shout out to RCB Bank for jumping on board to be a sponsor. RCB Bank's loan promotion is here for a limited time. Head into any of their 40 Oklahoma locations to get as low as 1.79 APR on your next car, boat, camper, or ATV. Apply online at rcbbank.com. RCB Bank, that's my bank. Rate and finance with approved credit. Restrictions apply. And member FDIC. Huge shout out to my sponsors. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next episode. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.